I just tested Ecodome Aldani. Aldani? Yeah, that's it. So I want to quickly go over my experience testing this dungeon. So it's been out since I believe Tuesday. It is Saturday at the time I'm recording this, so this is really my first time running it through, even though it seems like a lot of people have a decent handle on the dungeon so far. But here, I guess, are my thoughts. So starting off the dungeon, you have while it seems open, it's actually a very linear dungeon, and there's a few points where you can like kind of make your own path, but generally speaking, I feel like most of the percent you're going to have to pull, as well as the general structure of the dungeon, is relatively linear. Now, it is a 3-boss dungeon, which is super convenient. It seems that most players, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems like most players actually enjoy shorter kind of 3-boss dungeons, shorter timers. So we're seeing like a 30-minute-ish timer and 3 bosses, so very good. Now, I heard some pretty interesting rumors about the first area of trash being extremely difficult to pull large in. I don't know if maybe they hotfix it or my group was just good about kicking or interrupting or we're playing with good comps, but for the most part, there weren't a ton of Devour casts that went off, and even when they did die, the damage that was being done wasn't anything crazy. Now, most of the runs, oddly enough, that I did, groups didn't lust the first pull, and sometimes groups just didn't lust in general. Lusting the first pull with big cooldowns is probably going to be your best play. I've played with everything from Fire Mage to Frost Decay, Frost Mages. I saw some Shadow Priests, some Destro Locks. A lot of these classes seem to do pretty well. Obviously, when you're on PTR, you have a entire breadth of different players because there's just obviously a lot of skill parity from the floor to the ceiling. Also, some people might be more dependent on weak auras, or they might be trying new builds, or their class got reworked, or they're playing a brand new character entirely. So there's obviously a lot of different factors that make the dungeon go smooth or not. But for the first trash area, nothing too crazy. Couple of swirls to dodge, couple of frontals to avoid. There's a couple enrages that make mobs deal more damage. These can be soothed off, but also I didn't find them to be necessarily overpowered in terms of auto attacks. So as a brewmaster, especially with the rework, I'm feeling very tanky. Now, after the first couple pulls, you're pretty much locked at doing the first boss. Like, you have to do it. You can't really skip ahead. I didn't really try pulling through the wall, so I don't know if it's possible with like Chi Burst or things like Sigil or some kind of throw or whatever it might be. I'm sure there might be, if there is a way to do it, people will figure out how to pull through the wall, even though the mob right after the first boss isn't important. But anyways, let's talk about the first boss. And this boss's name is Azhikar. Now, this is a static worm-esque boss, very similar to Skolex from Sepulchre of the first ones, I believe. Now, this boss is quite interesting and isn't too bad once you know, I think, what you need to do. So, first off, someone needs to be in melee range. This should be the tank. I had a few instances where melee or people near melee got hit during the intermission of this boss just because I might have stepped out of range or just because the hitbox is like awkward. There were similar issues with Blazicon back on the PTR for 11.1, so Blizzard could make some adjustments here. I think expanding his hitbox by maybe a yard or two might help out. Outside of that, his mechanics are pretty simple. He spawns adds twice or 3 times depending on the cycle, because he does a mechanic on 100 energy. So when he starts the fight, I believe his energy might be a little bit higher. Don't quote me on that. This is just kind of like from what I noticed. Anyways, he's going to spawn a bunch of adds, and these adds are going to jump on random players. The leaps don't do a lot, but I do recommend people try to stand near melee, so cleaving them down is nice and easy. Essentially, this is just an ad control fight. During the encounter, he'll also just like spew sludge on 2 random players. This drops a pool on the ground, but not only does it do that, but it also leaves a kind of a static dot that healers are going to have to spot heal through. Think of like first boss of Cinderbrew Meadery with the throw Cinderbrew kegs or on 2 people. Healers are just going to have to heal them. Ideally, in like pre-made instances, you'll probably have one person use a defensive, the other person gets spot healed, and you're going to probably like calm that. If not, just it's a healer mechanic. The big thing though that he does is when he hits 100 energy, he does this thing called Devour. And it's going to suck in all the current remaining adds, but it's also going to spawn 2 sets of 3 adds, oftentimes kind of opposite ends of each other. Now, these mobs, they're basically docile. They basically get sucked towards the boss, and if he consumes them, not only does he heal, but he's also going to deal more damage for 30 seconds per ad that he eats. So this is going to affect both the ads that were currently up from the last phase, so if you didn't kill them, or during this phase. So this is pretty bad. He does restore 5% of his maximum health, and he gains a 15% damage increase for 30 seconds, which will last probably a good bit of the next phase. Now, is it possible to live a couple ads going in? Of course it is. Is it going to be ideal? No. Now, what's interesting about this is despite it being like a suck in, you can CC the mobs, and when they're stunned, they won't move. Or a Ring of Peace came in very, very handy here. Now, I did try running the new improved Nizao node for the knockup, but the issue with this is that the knockup is based around where Nizao is standing, so if he's not currently near the ads, his knockup is basically rendered useless. So, not super great. Ring of Peace, though, extremely powerful. I'm sure other things like Earth Grab Totem, Master Root, Ursul's Vortex, Typhoon, stuff like that, and like the Druid kit are going to be extremely powerful here. Same thing with Shaman knocks and stuns. Just kind of your general solid, I don't know, like kits from the classes that can do good CC, but AoE stuns are going to be kind of king here. The play will probably be something along the lines of like, you're going to hard CC one ad set, and then you're going to just like have DPS blow up the other. Is probably how it's going to end up working unless this boss gets reworked, which it could be. Anyways, after this boss goes down, it's honestly pretty easy boss compared to most. I like the bosses that have simple mechanics. Most of the trash in the next area, not super terrible. It seems like there's a lot of casts going off, but what's funny, and maybe Blizzard did a good job on tuning this, or maybe there needs to be more tuning, or maybe things aren't tuned at all or scaling. There's a lot of things that I haven't really looked at, but there are a lot of casters, but the casts don't seem to be that important. Like missing a bolt or 2 bolts will instantly kill a person. Now, of course, there's obviously like weird RNG where like they could be targeted by 5 bolts and they just get blown up. Or there's a case where you can pull really big and have your group do a lot of damage and blow the pack up really quickly. Or in some other cases, you might have a group that doesn't do that much damage or might not be comfortable in the class that they're playing. So, you can pull pretty big throughout this area, but the big thing, these like giant mech peacekeeper guys, I don't know what they're, I don't remember the name of them. They have this shield, like they start at 50% health. They do a nasty tank buster, and once their shield breaks, they become like overcharged, and they randomly deal a ton of damage to a random player and spawn like poop on the ground underneath their feet. So these guys, it seems like most groups will want to either avoid them or are already trying to avoid them on PTR, which is just so funny to me. So chances are you're going to do your best to not pull any of these if you can get around it. Chances are you're going to end up having to pull 1 or 2. There's one in the second boss room right before Tabat, I guess. We're going to just assume that that's his name. All right. So you will have to clear a good bit of trash in the second boss room before the boss spawns. And this is probably the best place to get count, because the next trash after this boss is pretty terrible. But this boss is actually really fun, at least from what I have found. So the way that this boss works is that he's going to kind of start off, he's mounted, and he's going to send some javelins at 2 random players. Now, these people will want to be spread, because if you get clipped by it, well, you're also going to get tethered to that javelin. And the reason why this is problematic is it does damage every second. It reduces your movement speed, and you need to like spread out for this thing that his like mount does called Warp Strike. So Awaz, I don't know how to pronounce it with the J. They'll like spawn images with little tethers to the player it's charging, and you need to make a pattern so you don't clip each other. Basically move out of the way of each other's, like the path of this. Every time you get hit, you take arcane damage for a couple seconds, so it applies a dot basically. So healers are gonna have to spot heal this, but if you're getting hit by 2 or 3 of these, it could be lethal, at least on a DPS. Now, unlike the first boss, this boss does actually have a tank buster. So you do want to be careful. It does a ton of arcane damage up front, and then it causes you to bleed for 8 seconds. So we've seen this pattern before on some bosses in Season 2, where the tank gets a pretty nasty bleed. Things like Azarok from Motherlode from the ads. You obviously have Captain Dalecry, which we're going to be seeing return in Season 3. That kind of bleed. So just be careful of Rift Claws, respect it. From my experience, at least doing this testing, it wasn't terrible. Like, the bleed is pretty nasty, but it's nothing too crazy. And then what's interesting is, like, once he hits 100 energy, he goes into basically like a phase 2 or like an intermission where Awaz will start randomly warping at players like crazy, like just over and over and over again. And Tabat becomes basically immune to damage. And so you need to then have Awaz, his pet or whatever, charge through the boss. So you have to kind of like take turns running behind the boss and not cleaving each other, because if you get hit, you're taking arcane damage and it stacks. So you kind of like rotate in and out of melee depending on who has it. I think this is a really cool mechanic. It's something that I feel like is more designed to be in a raid, but having it in a Mythic Plus in more intimate content, it's just awesome. I really like this fight and how it works. And basically, once you break a shield, both of them become destabilized. They just both get stunned. So you have 2-target cleave for 15 seconds where there's no other mechanics going on, and you just get to blast. So probably a good lust angle here. It happens about 1 minute into the fight. You could also just opt not to and lust whenever it comes up, at either before or after on pull. But overall, I think Tabat and as a carve, both the first and second boss are looking really, really fun. Now, the trash between second and third boss is kind of meh. So there's these like different pylons around, and I just found out before recording this video that they don't really do anything. They just give you a minor haste buff and movement speed buff when you channel them. So once you defeat some of these packs, you can like opt in to use this, then do a big pull and have a little bit of burst damage. But for the most part, you might see groups ignoring this. I don't know how impactful it's actually going to be in Mythic Plus. Now, what's annoying about this area is there's a lot of casters and there's not a whole lot of terrain. Now, of course, I've only run this a few times so far. They've all been pugs. So getting things lined up and stacked up is a little bit more difficult to do. Definitely a world where you can organize some type of strategy to do like 2 or 3 packs, line of sight them around a corner or some kind of pillar. This like this architect that's kind of architect. What am I fucking saying? This like architecture that's like crumbling. You can like probably line of sight and do some stuff like that. But for the most part, this area is just really slow and tedious. There's a couple of bolts. There's a couple of heals. These lizard dudes do this like warp strike, which will have them port. I think the lines are really nice to have. But I think Blizzard needs to update some of the other abilities, I guess, in these different pulls, and I'll talk about that more on the last boss. But basically, just hold W all the way to the final boss. There's a couple of guys that will like consume a rift, and it'll spawn an ad. You do want to kill this ad as fast as possible, because as they channel, it does damage, and they get an absorption shield. But when you break that ad or kill it, it stuns the guy for a few seconds. So you're going to want to do that pretty often. And outside of that, not too much going on. Just don't be short count. I think all of the runs that I've done so far, I end up not pulling enough before this boss. Generally on PTR, at least in the past, it's been kind of common for groups not to do all the percent in a key. The weird thing is they recently implemented this new system where if you leave, you get flagged. So it's not really affecting people on PTR from my understanding, but some people are wanting to actually finish dungeons for the first time, which is kind of weird. Anyways, last boss is Soul Scribe. Now, this guy and this boss, I've heard things about this boss that's like really terrible, but I have not had a bad experience. I would say actually the first boss is the worst out of these 3. I think this boss is actually really, really interesting. So how the fight works is he doesn't have a lot of mechanics. And so what he'll do is first he'll spawn ceremonial daggers. Actually, right before this, he'll actually do Whispers of Fate, which will shatter your fate. So it'll rip your soul from your character, and it'll place it randomly in the room. And I mean, it's like random, but it's like kind of static for a set amount of distance away from the boss. And so what he'll do is you need to bodyguard your soul, or you have to go and pick up your soul. So you can see it here. It's indicated with this little arrow where it's at. Obviously, I'm a monk, so picking these up is very easy. But I was playing with like a Shadow Priest, for example, and they probably weren't having as fun of a time than I was, because obviously mobility reasons. But basically, when your soul is shattered, you take a burst of arcane damage. And if your ad or your soul gets damaged by an ability, so this frontal like dagger that you're going to see here, you'll take damage from your soul getting hits. And if you don't absorb or consume or pick up your soul in time, you also get a debuff called Wounded Fate, which makes you also take arcane damage, and it reduces your haste by 30%. So you definitely want to pick up your ad. Most classes will want to. Again, as a Brewmaster, don't really care about haste as much, but it's still a pretty significant damage down if you don't do the mechanic properly. So all this fight is picking up like your soul. Now, what's interesting about this is it stacks, and when you pick up the buff, it's a 10% healing and damage buff. So it can stack, you can pick it up, and it'll give you a small damage boost. Now, after Ceremonial Dagger, he'll also do Eternal Weave, which is kind of the same thing, or not Eternal Weave. It's Dread the Unknown, which just does like a circle of burst damage around you. Same thing has to happen here. Pick up your soul and then spread. If you do that successfully, you're going to get a damage gain, and you're not going to take big damage, which is good. And then last but not least, he does like an intermission where he'll spawn 3 souls from you. And the idea here is, it's interesting because you could just pick all of them up. You have about 6 seconds per cone. Every time a new cone pattern spawns, you have 6 seconds to pick up your souls. Your soul that gets hit will put a dot on you and take a ton of damage, which is obviously super bad. But you can also like min-max this by recognizing which one of your souls is actually in the frontal cone, because the way that they're spread out, they should actually be staggered. And so you can pick up one, wait for the frontal go off, you have like a 10% damage gain, and then right before your debuff falls off during the next set of cones, you can pick up your next thing, refreshing your buff, putting you to 20% damage gain, and protecting you from taking damage. And then you can do it again third time, and then that's just pretty much the fight, and it's a rinse and repeat. So I think this fight's really fun. It's obviously contingent on the fact of people knowing what they're doing and making sure you're spreading out. Now, the one thing that's kind of annoying, and I don't know if Blizzard could really fix this, is you can't see other people's souls. So when someone's trying to like, maybe you're standing on top of someone else's soul and they don't want to hit you, and but they're trying to pick it up. It's just kind of like, there's like a little bit of tension there, which is awkward. I also think they need to improve the frontal kind of edge animation on the Eternal Weave cast. So kind of the intermission on this boss. Outside of that though, this dungeon is really fun. I had a blast testing it. I only was able to test it a couple of times. Some groups fell apart before second boss just because of some of the trash is a little annoying, or people DCing, or just low damage. And again, PTR people are weird. Overall, I really like this dungeon. I'm gonna be doing boss guides and shit. So if you liked my boss guides from any of, I basically have been doing them since Dragonflight, but if you enjoy my boss guides, keep an eye out for that. I'm gonna be doing that as the patch gets closer. There's a chance that they rework some of these bosses or change the mechanics or add new animations. So I'm gonna wait until we get closer to the patch before doing those. But I hope you guys enjoy this breakdown. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.